Okay, this is my final video, and I'm going to make it really brief because I think I'm putting it on Ning, and I don't know what the size restrictions might be for that. So, for my final conflict, I was thinking about the conflict that really uh, bears on the treatment of patients in the unit where I work. And of course, there are the conflicts that I've been talking about between staff and patients. Um, and what I realized was that probably the most important underlying conflict is that within the patient themselves, as they cope with a diagnosis, an illness, prognosis, and the recommended treatment. And the number one reason people come back to us time and again is because they have not complied, as it's called, or not been able to pursue their own treatment. So in order to think about this conflict, I started thinking about a little bit about self psychology, object relations, and also grief. Because I noticed that patients, when they receive a diagnosis, go through a process that resembles the various models of grief processing that are out there. I think we're all familiar with the denial, bargaining, anger, regression, respite, depression, and acceptance model. There are a few others as well that are a little more up to date. First I considered the self-object of the patient, and when they receive the diagnosis, the self-object as an interjected, an object that representing the self, of course, changes. It has to change because now it has this diagnosis and all of the attendant stigma and preconceptions and fears and so forth associated with it. So I painted a picture to try to represent a sort of self-object that had been broken open and was now, in a way, alien to the patient, and therefore very uncomfortable. Because having an alien self-object really is something that causes a great deal of anxiety. It's something that's also central to certain models of borderline disorder and diffuse self-concept in certain patients. So there's my interpretation of that. Then we have the multiple parallel and cyclical and bidirectional processes of dealing with the grief. So the changed self-object in a way is experienced as a loss, and so I'm making an analogy, or I'm sort of making that parallel. And so I kind of made this diagrammatic painting representing I don't know, different various strata and areas of work being done and going in different directions, and then roadblocks and sort of blocks in the way. It's almost like a flow chart, I guess. So these would be the various layers of emotion, the anger, the bargaining, the denial, the suppression, the regression, the brief respite, and finally the acceptance at some point. It's very abstract, of course, but that was sort of the intention there. So as the patient begins to come to terms with their diagnosis and the prognosis and the recommended treatment, we hope that they are able to reintegrate their self-object so that it becomes no longer an alien object and now becomes a more familiar self-object that the patient can feel whole with. And so I made a painting that represents, I don't know, it's a not a completely consolidated image, but does begin to show some organization in some different regions, and also bring in other objects, which is really important because the integrated self object that is now no longer alien to the self is now able to form object relations with external objects, more specifically the introjects of those objects as they're experienced by the patient, so that the patient is now able to form relationships, and we hope form relationships with caregivers that are characterized by trust and cooperation and just general feeling of comfort in those relationships. So anyway, that's my artwork. The paper is also posted, and I'll put photos of the artwork up there as well. All right, thanks for listening.